The cold vastness of space stretched endlessly, a black void broken only by distant stars that flickered like tiny pinpricks of light. Inside one of the many escape pods drifting in this lonely space was a young alien girl, her name lost to the stars, her kind nearly wiped out by a brutal war. Her species, the Ilari, were once a peaceful race, living among the galaxies in harmony, until the invasion of a fierce enemy left their worlds in ruin. The girl had been lucky to escape, or at least, that's what she thought. Now, alone in the emptiness, she wasn't sure anymore if luck had been on her side. The pod's interior was cramped and cold, with only the hum of the machinery around her as company. Her breath came in shallow gasps, her body weak from days without proper nourishment, and the harshness of space was beginning to take its toll. Her hands trembled as she clutched a small glowing device that was still sending out a distress signal. The faint light from the device flickered intermittently, casting weak shadows on the walls of the pod. She had been drifting like this for days. No, it felt like weeks. Every day, she watched as ships from different species passed by, scanning her pod, observing her, and then moving on, leaving her to drift further into nothingness. No one had stopped. No one cared. The girl had heard the stories of how the humans, those flesh-eating, bloodthirsty beings, were feared across the galaxies. The stories spoke of their cruelty, of their vicious nature, and their reputation as merciless killers. She had never met one in person, but the rumors were enough to fill her with dread. It was said that when the humans found something weak, they tore it apart without a second thought. Her pod had been passing through a particularly dangerous sector, known for its lawlessness and its constant battles. She had hoped that perhaps a friendly ship would find her, a group from another race that might offer some help. But every ship that came near her seemed to turn away, as if they were afraid of her or just didn't care. As the days dragged on, the girl's hope began to fade. She couldn't understand it. She had heard that the other races had helped each other in times of need, that even the most unlikely alliances could form when the situation was desperate. But not for her. The Ilari were known for their peace, their gentle nature, and their wisdom. Surely, someone would have stopped. Someone would have cared. But no one had. Then, just as she was beginning to lose all hope, something changed. The pod's systems gave a soft peep, an alert that she hadn't heard in what felt like forever. A ship was near. She almost didn't believe it at first, but when the pod's lights flickered to life, she knew something was happening. Her heart beat faster. She could feel her fear rising again. But this time, it was different. This ship wasn't like the others. She didn't know why, but there was something about it, something that made her blood run cold. The design of the ship was large, dark, and menacing, and its presence alone filled the space around her with a sense of power. It wasn't like the sleek, advanced ships of the peaceful species. This one was rough around the edges, covered in scars and burn marks from battle. Before she could react, a heavy pull jerked the pod out of its slow, aimless drift. The sudden force made her stomach lurch, but she had no time to adjust. Her pod was caught in a tractor beam. Her pulse raced as she looked out of the tiny window, watching the enormous ship loom closer. The insignia on the side of the ship made her blood freeze. Humans. She had heard the stories, but seeing them in person, knowing she was now in their hands, felt like a nightmare. The humans were the most feared species in the galaxy. They had a reputation for being brutal, merciless. The stories painted them as carnivores, as monsters who could never be trusted. The girl had never imagined she would be caught by them. She didn't know what to expect, but the fear gripped her heart. Inside the pod, she clenched her fists, trying to control the panic rising inside her. She had no choice but to trust the system now, to let herself be pulled aboard this ship. Her only hope was that maybe they would spare her, but she doubted it. The humans were ruthless. What chance did she stand? The tractor beam gently pulled the pod into a hangar bay, and the moment it was securely docked, the hatch of her pod opened with a hiss. She stepped out, her legs weak from the long days of drifting in space. She barely had time to adjust before a group of humans in dark uniforms surrounded her. Their expressions were unreadable, their eyes cold. A tall man with a scar running down his face stepped forward. His eyes studied her, and for a moment, it felt as if he was trying to gauge her worth, as if deciding whether she was worth his attention. She expected him to make a cruel comment or demand something from her, but instead, he motioned for the others to step back. One of them approached her, holding a food ration in their hands. Without saying a word, they handed it to her, their expression unchanged. Confused and wary, the girl took the ration, though her hands shook as she held it. She wanted to ask questions, to scream, to demand to know why they had stopped for her, but she could not. Fear choked her voice, and instead, she swallowed the food in silence. She couldn't trust them, not yet. She didn't know what their motives were. The humans didn't seem interested in speaking to her. They didn't ask her for anything. They simply observed her, waiting, as if they were uncertain what to do next. She noticed their eyes often glanced at her, then quickly shifted away. It was clear they were hesitant, unsure of her. Was this the same species that everyone feared? These humans who seemed so detached, so emotionless, weren't behaving like monsters at all. Instead, they seemed almost curious. The girl's mind raced with questions. Why had they saved her? Why didn't they just leave her to die like everyone else had? The humans were known to destroy weaker species, not save them. Was this some sort of trap? But as the moments passed, she began to notice small things, things that didn't align with the stories she had been told. The humans didn't treat her like an enemy. They didn't look at her with hatred or hunger. They simply seemed indifferent. Still, her heart was full of doubt. The fear was not gone. Not yet. But perhaps, just perhaps, these humans weren't exactly what she had been taught to fear. The girl sat quietly in the corner of the cold metal room, clutching the ration the human had given her. Her mind was racing, trying to make sense of what was happening. She couldn't understand it. The humans had taken her aboard their ship, but instead of harming her, they had fed her, treated her like a guest. It didn't make sense. Everything she had been taught about these creatures, these monsters, told her they would show no mercy. Yet here she was, alive and unharmed, with no idea why. The ship around her was unlike anything she had ever seen. It was enormous, dark, and harshly industrial. The walls were covered with scratches and burn marks, evidence of a long and brutal history of battle. The hum of the engines vibrated through the floor beneath her feet, and the air smelled of oil and metal. It was a ship built for war, a ship that spoke of hardship and survival. There were no soft colors or fancy decorations. Everything was functional, stripped down, and practical. The girl had heard the stories, of course. She had heard of the humans' terrible reputation as savages, as creatures who lived only for war, destruction, and feeding. But she had also heard that they were survivors, survivors of the harshest battles, the worst conditions, and a galaxy that didn't care for their existence. What if the stories were all wrong? What if they weren't the monsters everyone believed them to be? Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps approaching. She looked up to see the tall human from earlier, the one who had seemed to be in charge, walking toward her. His face was rugged, scared from battles fought long ago, and his eyes held a certain hardness to them. But now, there was a flicker of something else, something like curiosity. He stopped in front of her, folding his arms across his chest, and studied her. The girl felt uneasy under his gaze. Was he sizing her up? Was he deciding what to do with her next? But instead of speaking, he simply nodded, as if to himself, and turned to walk away. It wasn't what she had expected. The human didn't speak, didn't demand anything from her. He just left. Confused, the girl looked around the room, unsure of what to do next. She wanted to leave, to escape, but there was no way out. The ship was massive, and she had no idea where she was or how to navigate it. She had no choice but to wait. But what exactly was she waiting for? As the hours passed, The girl was left alone in the room, only the quiet hum of the ship and the occasional footstep outside to remind her that she wasn't truly alone. Eventually, another human entered. This one was smaller, with short, dark hair and a calm expression. She didn't seem threatening. She walked over to the girl and offered a small metal cup. "Water," the human said, her voice low and careful. The girl took the cup, hesitantly at first, but then she realized how thirsty she was. She drank the water quickly, almost greedily, and then set the cup down. The human didn't say anything more, just stood there, watching her for a moment before turning to leave. But before she did, she spoke again. "They won't hurt you," the human said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You're safe here." Safe. The word echoed in the girl's mind. Was she really safe here? Could she trust them? Could she trust anyone anymore? The girl wasn't sure if she believed the human. After all, she had been abandoned by her own kind. She had been left to die, cast out like an unwanted thing. And now she was here, in the hands of the most feared species in the galaxy. The humans had no reason to be kind to her, no reason to show mercy. And yet, they were. The days blended together, and the girl's confusion grew. The humans were strange. They never spoke much to her, but they never treated her like an enemy either. They didn't force her to do anything, didn't demand answers to the questions they must have had. It was as though they were waiting for her to speak first, waiting for her to trust them before they revealed anything. Every so often, the girl would catch glimpses of the humans' lives, their routines, the way they interacted with one another. They were hard, yes, but they were not what the stories had made them out to be. They weren't bloodthirsty killers, not in the way she had been taught to expect. They had their own struggles, their own scars, their own reasons for living the way they did. And yet, despite everything, they hadn't turned her away. One evening, she sat by a window looking out into the endless expanse of space. The stars seemed so close, so endless. It was hard to believe she had been alone out there, lost in the vastness, with no one caring if she lived or died. But now she was on this ship, surrounded by humans who didn't seem to want anything from her except her survival. The door behind her creaked open, and the same human from earlier, Sergeant Cade, as she had heard him called, walked in. He stood there for a moment, silent, watching her. She didn't turn around to face him. She didn't know what to say. He didn't seem to want to speak either. He just stood there, as if thinking, as if deciding something important. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he spoke. "Why are you still here?" he asked, his voice rough, as though the words were hard for him to say. The girl turned slowly to face him, unsure of how to answer. Why was she still here? Why had the humans kept her alive? Why hadn't they just thrown her out into space like everyone else had done? "I don't know," she said softly, her voice trembling. Cade nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. He didn't seem angry. He didn't seem afraid. He just seemed resigned, as if he already knew the answer but was waiting for her to figure it out. "You're not the first one to be left behind," he said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. "And you won't be the last." The words hung in the air between them, heavy and full of meaning. The girl stared at him, trying to understand what he meant, but she couldn't. Not yet. She still didn't trust him. She couldn't. But as Cade turned and left the room, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was changing. Slowly, the girl was starting to realize that these humans, these supposed monsters, might not be the villains everyone believed them to be. She wasn't sure what they were yet, but maybe, just maybe, they were something more complicated than she had been told. The days on the ship felt strange to the girl. She couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more going on here, something beneath the surface that she wasn't seeing. The humans, despite their rough exterior, weren't like the monsters she had been taught to fear. Every time she thought about the stories, about the tales of carnivorous humans who would tear her apart the moment they laid eyes on her, she felt a growing sense of doubt. None of the humans on this ship had acted like that. None had hurt her. None had even raised their voices in anger. If anything, they seemed protective. But protective of what? Her questions were still unanswered, and the longer she stayed aboard, the more confused she became. Sergeant Cade had been the only one to speak to her directly, but even his words left her with more questions than answers. She couldn't understand why he'd said that she wasn't the first to be abandoned. What did he mean by that? One evening, as she wandered through the cold metal halls of the ship, she came across a room she hadn't seen before. The door was open just a crack, and the sounds coming from inside drew her attention. She hesitated for a moment, then stepped closer. Inside, a group of humans were gathered around a large table, watching a screen. The girl recognized Cade among them, sitting at the head of the table. He was speaking quietly to the others, but she couldn't make out the words. The group was focused on the screen, showing images of different planets and species, warships, resources, strange, alien landscapes. She felt a strange pull to see more, so she slipped inside the room, trying to stay out of sight. The humans didn't seem to notice her presence as they continued talking in low voices. She crouched behind one of the large metal crates, watching them closely. Cade's voice grew louder as he pointed at one of the images on the screen. "We can't just sit back and wait for the council to act. We have to show them the truth. We have to show them we're not the monsters they say we are." The girl's heart raced. The council. Was that the same powerful group that had wiped out her people, the Ilari? She had heard whispers of the council, an organization made up of the strongest and most influential races in the galaxy. They controlled everything. The girl had always believed they were the ones who upheld peace, who decided who lived and who died. But now, she wasn't so sure. The humans weren't what she had thought they were. They weren't the heartless killers everyone spoke of. They were planning something big. Another human, a woman with short blonde hair, spoke up from the other side of the table. "But we can't just go in guns blazing. We need evidence. We need something that will make the council look at us and see the truth. We need to show them that we're not the threat they think we are." "We have it," Cade replied, his voice firm. "We've gathered enough footage from the Ilari and the other abandoned species we've helped. It's time to send it out to the galaxy. We'll make them listen." The girl's mind was spinning. They had footage. Of the Ilari. Of her people. She felt a sharp pang of emotion in her chest, a mix of grief and confusion. Her people had been destroyed. She had watched her world burn, her family gone. But the humans had been there. They had rescued survivors, helped them escape. And now they were planning to show the galaxy the truth that the humans were not monsters, that they were not the enemies everyone believed them to be. It was like a wall inside her mind was crumbling. The humans weren't enemies. They had been misunderstood, misrepresented. They were survivors, just like the Ilari. But why hadn't they said anything? Why had they kept their intentions hidden? As the conversation continued, the girl stayed hidden in the shadows, piecing together the fragments of information she had gathered. She was beginning to understand more than she had before. The humans weren't some random group of outcasts. They were a species with a purpose. They were fighting against a larger power, a corrupt system that had lied about them for years. They were fighting for their survival. And, in a way, they were fighting for the survival of everyone else too. Cade's voice cut through her thoughts. "It's time to make our move. We can't stay silent any longer. The galaxy deserves to know the truth, and we'll make sure they do." He paused, glancing at the other humans around the table. Then his eyes met the girl's, as if sensing her presence. For a brief moment, their gazes locked. She froze, her heart pounding in her chest. Had he seen her? Had he known she was listening? But Cade didn't react. He simply nodded and turned back to the group, continuing to discuss their plans. The girl stayed still, afraid to move. Once the meeting ended and the humans filed out of the room, the girl stayed behind. her mind in turmoil. She now understood why the humans had saved her, why they had taken her aboard their ship and treated her with care. They were preparing for something bigger than her. They were about to expose the truth to the galaxy, to show everyone that they were not the monsters everyone thought they were. But now, she had a choice to make. The humans had rescued her, but they were also fighting a battle she hadn't been prepared for. She wasn't sure where she stood anymore. She wasn't sure where she belonged. Was she supposed to stay with the humans and help them fight? Or was she supposed to return to her own kind, to try to rebuild what had been lost? The girl's thoughts raced as she wandered through the darkened halls of the ship. She was no longer afraid of the humans. She didn't know if she could trust them completely yet, but they were showing her a new side of themselves, a side that she had never seen before. Maybe they were the key to something more, something bigger than herself. Maybe, just maybe, they were the answer to ending the war that had destroyed her people. The girl sat in her small room, staring out of the tiny window, watching the stars drift by. Her thoughts were heavy, swirling like the endless darkness outside. She had learned so much in such a short time. The humans weren't the monsters she had been taught to fear. They weren't cruel and heartless. They were survivors, much like her, fighting against a galaxy that had abandoned them. But now, everything was different. The humans had shown her that there was more at stake than her own survival. There was a war brewing, one that would affect every living being in the galaxy. And they weren't just fighting for themselves. They were fighting for everyone. The girl couldn't ignore that truth. She had seen it in the meeting, heard the plans they were making. They wanted to expose the lies, to show the galaxy that the humans weren't the villains. But what did that mean for her? Her heart felt torn. She had lost everything. Her home, her family, her people. The Ilari were gone, wiped out by a war they had never wanted. She was alone in the universe, and now the humans were offering her something she hadn't dared to hope for, a future. But what kind of future? Could she truly align herself with the humans who had once been seen as the enemy? She didn't know. The decision weighed heavily on her. She could stay hidden, stay out of the way, or she could choose to stand with the humans, fight for something bigger than herself. But was that what she wanted? Could she trust them enough to fight alongside them? As the days passed, she found herself spending more time with Cade, the tall, scarred human who had led the group. He had been the one to bring her aboard the ship, the one who had shown her that not all humans were monsters. At first, she had been afraid of him, afraid of his cold, hard demeanor. But now she could see the burden he carried. He wasn't just a soldier. He was a leader, someone who had lived through pain, through loss, just like her. He had scars, both inside and out, and the weight of responsibility seemed to sit heavily on his shoulders. One evening, she found herself standing in front of Cade, her heart pounding in her chest. He was watching her, waiting for her to speak. The silence between them was thick, as if they both understood what was at stake, but neither knew where to begin. "I've seen the footage," she said softly, her voice trembling. "I know what you're planning." Cade didn't respond at first. He simply nodded, his eyes searching hers, as if looking for something. "You don't have to be a part of this," he said quietly. "You don't owe us anything. You've already been through enough. If you want to leave, we'll drop you off at the next station. You can go back to wherever you feel safest." But the girl didn't want safety. Not anymore. She had seen what the humans were doing. She had seen how they were fighting for something more than just survival. They were fighting for the truth. They were fighting to show the galaxy that they weren't the monsters everyone thought they were. And maybe, just maybe, they could show the galaxy the truth about her people too. The Ilari. "I don't know where I belong anymore," she said, her voice breaking. "My people are gone. And I'm scared. But I can't just sit back and do nothing. I can't ignore this. You're not the monsters I thought you were. You're trying to fix things. And maybe I can help too." Cade's expression softened. For a moment, he looked almost relieved. He stepped closer to her, placing a hand on her shoulder in a rare moment of kindness. "We're not perfect," he said quietly. "We've made mistakes, we've hurt people, but we're not the enemy. We're just trying to survive, to make sure no one else has to go through what we did." The girl nodded, feeling a strange warmth in her chest. Maybe she wasn't alone in this fight after all. Maybe, for the first time in a long time, she had found people who understood what it meant to lose everything. People who weren't just out for their own gain, but who wanted to make things right. Cade stepped back, giving her space to think. "You don't have to decide right now," he said, his voice low and steady. "Take your time. We're not rushing you. But if you decide to stay, if you decide to stand with us, know that we'll protect you. We'll fight for you, but only if you're ready." The girl stood there, her mind racing. The humans had given her a choice. They had shown her that she didn't have to carry the weight of her past alone. For the first time since the destruction of her world, she felt like she had a purpose. She wasn't just a survivor. She was part of something bigger, a chance to make a difference, to fight for the truth, and maybe, just maybe, to rebuild what had been lost. Her heart pounded in her chest as she thought about the path ahead. There was no going back. The galaxy was a dangerous place, and the fight ahead wouldn't be easy. But she couldn't sit back anymore. She had a role to play. She had to make a choice. And in that moment, she knew what she had to do. She wasn't going to run away. She wasn't going to hide. She was going to stand with the humans. She was going to fight for the truth. She looked up at Cade, her eyes steady now. "I'm ready," she said, her voice stronger than it had ever been. Cade smiled, a small but genuine smile, and nodded. "Then welcome to the fight." The girl stood on the bridge of the human ship, looking out at the endless stars stretching before her. The ship hummed softly beneath her feet, a constant reminder that she was no longer alone in the dark expanse of space. The weight of her decision had settled over her, and it felt both heavy and liberating at the same time. She had chosen to stand with the humans, to join them in their fight to expose the truth to the galaxy. Cade had been the first to offer her a place among them, and now she had become part of their crew, part of something bigger than herself. They were more than just survivors. They were revolutionaries. They weren't just trying to survive anymore. They were fighting for a future where no one would have to suffer the way they had. The girl wasn't sure what would happen next, but she knew one thing for certain. She couldn't go back. She couldn't return to the past where her people had been wiped out, where everything she knew had been lost. She had to keep moving forward. And if that meant fighting alongside the humans, then she would. Days turned into weeks as the humans prepared for the mission. They were gathering evidence, sending messages, and slowly but surely, the plan was taking shape. The girl, though still learning, was more than willing to help. She listened to the conversations, learned the systems of the ship, and grew closer to the crew. The humans weren't perfect, but they were her family now. They had saved her, given her a chance, and in return, she would fight for them just as they were fighting for the truth. One evening, Cade called her to the briefing room. She had been expecting it. There was a sense of urgency in the air lately. The time was approaching. As she entered, she saw Cade and the rest of the crew gathered around the large table, their faces serious. A new image flashed on the screen in front of them. The Council's headquarters. A massive, imposing structure that stood like a dark pillar against the stars. It was their destination. The humans were going to expose the Council's lies, to show the galaxy that they were not the villains they had been painted to be. They had everything they needed. The footage of the Illyri's destruction, the evidence of human kindness and survival, and the story of their own struggle. "This is it," Cade said, his voice steady but filled with determination. "We make our stand here. The Council has controlled the narrative for too long. It's time to change that. The galaxy deserves to know the truth." The girl felt a knot in her stomach, but it wasn't fear. It was anticipation. This was what she had chosen. She was ready to fight. Cade turned to her. "Are you sure about this?" His question was more than just about the mission. He was asking her if she was ready to face the truth, to stand up to the power that had destroyed her people. The girl nodded, her voice strong. "I'm ready. I want the galaxy to see who we really are." The crew members around her nodded in agreement. There was a sense of unity in the room, a sense of shared purpose. They were no longer just a group of survivors. They were a force ready to shake the foundations of the galaxy. The girl stood tall, her heart racing, as she looked around the room at the humans who had become her new family. They weren't perfect. They weren't always kind or easy to understand, but they had shown her a different side of themselves, a side she never could have imagined. They had been misunderstood, cast aside, and yet they still fought. They fought not just for survival, but for something greater, for the truth. As the final preparations were made, the ship set course for the Council's headquarters. The tension in the air was thick, but there was also a spark of hope. This was more than just a battle. This was the beginning of a new chapter, one where the truth would finally be told. The girl stood by the window, watching as the stars sped by. She thought about her people, about the Ilari. They were gone, but their story wasn't over. Not yet. She would make sure of it. She wasn't just an orphan anymore. She wasn't just a survivor. She was part of something that could change the galaxy. She was part of a fight for truth and justice. And no matter what happened next, she knew she had made the right choice. As the ship neared its destination, the girl felt a surge of strength, a determination she hadn't felt in a long time. The battle ahead wouldn't be easy. The Council was powerful, and the odds were stacked against them. But she wasn't afraid anymore. She had her family now, and together they would fight. "We're ready," Cade said, his voice steady and clear. And the girl knew that they were. Ready to expose the lies. Ready to show the galaxy the truth. Ready to fight for a future that was no longer defined by fear.